I arrived at Yellowstone National Park on a Tuesday in late September with everything I owned, packed into a dented Subaru and a biology certificate that felt less like an achievement and more like proof I'd survived the last 2 years. My father had died in March, pancreatic cancer, the kind that moves fast once it announces itself, and I'd spent the months after his funeral applying to seasonal positions across the West, anywhere remote enough that silence felt like a feature instead of a problem. The Madison Fountain Flats district seemed perfect. Thermal features, minimal foot traffic in the shoulder season, and enough distance from anything familiar that I could pretend to be someone new. The bunkhouse sat at the edge of a steaming meadow, a low-slung structure with peeling paint and windows that rattled in their frames. Lodgepole pines crowded the perimeter like spectators, their trunks blackened from old fires, and beyond them, the land opened into a pale expanse of silica and sulfur, where the ground breathed visible heat into the cooling air. It smelled like wet pennies and rotten eggs, hydrogen sulfide. I knew from my coursework, but underneath that was something older, heavier, like the scent of a basement left closed too long. Supervisor Caroline Mott met me on the steps. She was maybe 50, compact and weathered, with iron-grey hair pulled back in a braid and eyes that seemed to catalogue you without judgment. She shook my hand once firmly and said, "Noah Estrada, you made good time." Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact, the kind that didn't waste syllables. "Traffic was light," I said, trying to match her tone. She nodded and gestured toward the door. "Get settled. Dinner's at 6. We'll do your orientation after." The bunkhouse interior was Spartan. 2 rows of narrow beds, a communal table scarred with initials and coffee rings, a wood stove that ticked as it cooled. I chose a bed near the back, away from the windows, and unpacked my bags with the methodical efficiency I'd learned during my father's final months. Everything folded, everything in its place, as if order could prevent further collapse. At dinner, I met the other seasonals, a quiet woman named Rena who worked the northern trails, and Eli Barden, a second-year ranger with an easy grin and a denim jacket he wore like armor against the cold. Eli did most of the talking, filling the silence with stories about drunk tourists and close calls with bison. Carleen ate without comment, and when the meal ended, she cleared her throat once. "Noah, stay behind." Eli shot me a look, half sympathy, half amusement, and followed Rena out into the dusk. Carleen pulled a weather-stained field notebook from a drawer and set it on the table between us. The cover was stamped in faded ink. "Operational Night. This is yours while you're assigned to evening patrols," she said, opening it to a typewritten page protected by a clear sleeve. "Read it, memorize it, follow it exactly." I leaned forward and read, "If you encounter fog on a clear night, do not walk into it. Count to 40 and let it move. If you hear your name on the portable radio after 12:13 a.m., do not answer. Confirm only with district call sign. Do not leave the boardwalk near thermal features after dark, even for a phone or hat. If you see headlamps where there is no trail, turn your own off and face away. Offer water to anyone barefoot but give no directions. Notify dispatch when they leave." I looked up at Caroline, expecting a punchline. "Is this some kind of hazing thing?" Her expression didn't change. "No. Then what? This place has patterns," she said, closing the notebook and sliding it toward me. "We learned where not to stand." I wanted to argue, to point out the absurdity of rules about fog and radios and barefoot strangers, but something in her voice stopped me. It wasn't stern or ominous. It was tired, the weariness of someone who'd had this conversation too many times and knew how it would end. "Okay," I said, tucking the notebook under my arm. "I'll read it." She nodded once. "Your first patrol is tomorrow night, 12 to 4. Stay on the boardwalks, check the pullouts, log anything unusual. Questions?" I had 100, but none I could articulate. "No, ma'am." "Good, get some sleep." I walked back to my bunk as the last light bled from the sky. Through the windows I could see the meadow transformed, steam rising in slow, deliberate columns, backlit by a moon that hadn't yet cleared the tree line. The lodgepoles creaked in a wind I couldn't feel from inside. Somewhere in the distance a bison snorted, a low, guttural sound that carried across the flats like a warning. I sat on my bed and opened the notebook again. The rules stared back at me, clinical and strange, and I told myself they were metaphors, safety guidelines dressed up in spooky language to keep rookies alert. Fog on clear nights meant temperature inversions. Voices on the radio were skip propagation or bored dispatchers playing pranks. Headlamps off-trail were poachers or lost hikers. But as I lay in the dark, listening to the bunkhouse settle and the geothermal breath of the basin outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that Carleen hadn't been trying to scare me. She'd been trying to prepare me. My first midnight patrol began with Carleen handing me a portable radio, a flashlight with a red filter option, and a reminder: stay on the boardwalks. Log everything. Call if you need backup, but use district call sign only. Madison 1, that's you. No names on the air after midnight. I clipped the radio to my belt and stepped out into a cold so sharp it felt like inhaling glass. The stars were impossible, dense and bright in a way I'd never seen in the city, spilling across the sky like someone had shattered a chandelier. The boardwalk stretched ahead of me, a pale ribbon cutting through darkness punctuated by the faint glow of thermal vents. Steam rose in lazy spirals, catching moonlight and turning it silver. It was beautiful. It was also profoundly unsettling in a way I couldn't name. I walked slowly, my boots echoing on the wooden planks, and checked each pullout as instructed. Empty parking spaces, locked restrooms, informational signs that creaked in the wind. The thermal features hissed and gurgled to my left, their surfaces reflecting starlight in colors that shouldn't exist: turquoise, rust, deep violet. The air smelled like sulfur and wet stone. At 12:17 a.m., the radio on my hip clicked. A voice said, "Noah? You there?" I froze mid-step. The voice was male, familiar, with a gentle rasp I'd heard 1,000 times, my father's voice, exact in cadence and tone, down to the slight upturn at the end of a question. The way he'd always sounded when checking if I was awake during late-night drives to the hospital. My hand moved toward the transmit button before my brain caught up. Habit, muscle memory, the reflex of answering when someone you love calls your name. My thumb hovered over the button. Then I remembered, if you hear your name on the portable radio after 12:13 a.m., do not answer. Confirm only with district call sign. My breath came shallow and fast. I forced my voice flat, emotionless, the way Carleen spoke. Madison 1, checking trailhead. The radio went silent. No response, no static, just an absence so complete it felt like the air itself had gone dead. A light breeze pushed across the meadow, carrying steam over the boardwalk in a slow, deliberate curtain. For a moment I was standing in a cloud, the world reduced to 3 feet of visibility, and the sound of my own heartbeat. Then the breeze passed, the steam cleared, and I was alone again under impossible stars. I stood there for a full minute, trying to rationalize what I'd heard. Skip propagation, radio signals bouncing off the atmosphere, pulling in voices from hundreds of miles away. Someone with a similar voice, a coincidence of tone and phrasing. Stress, grief, my brain playing tricks in the altitude and cold, but none of those explanations accounted for the name. My name, spoken the exact way my father had said it in the last coherent conversation we'd had, 3 days before he died, when he'd asked if I was okay and I'd lied and said yes. I resumed my patrol with the radio volume turned low. Near the end of my route, as I approached the final pullout before looping back toward the bunkhouse, I saw it. A phone lying on the ground just beyond the boardwalk railing, its screen glowing faintly in the dark. Someone had dropped it, or thrown it maybe, in a moment of frustration or panic. The light pulsed softly, a notification or incoming call lighting up the screen. My first instinct was to retrieve it. Lost property protocol, basic decency, the simple human reflex to help. I glanced around, no one in sight. Nothing but steam and shadow and the distant silhouette of lodgepoles against the stars. I stepped over the railing. One boot finding purchase on what looked like solid ground. The plank beneath my back foot popped, a sharp, splitting sound, and I felt the crust beneath my forward boot settle, sinking slightly as heat licked up my shin through my pant leg. Not burning, but close, uncomfortably close. The kind of heat that promised worse if I stayed. Do not leave the boardwalk near thermal features after dark, even for a phone or hat. I froze, heart hammering, and eased my weight backward onto the boardwalk. My boot left a shallow depression in the pale crust, the edges already darkening with moisture. I stepped fully back onto the wood and looked down at the phone. Its light blinked out by itself. No fade, no dimming, just there, then not. Like someone had pressed a button I couldn't see. I waited, breathing hard, and watched the spot where it had been. Nothing. just fragile crust and the faint shimmer of heat distortion rising in the cold. In the morning, after my shift ended, and dawn coughed pale light across the basin, I walked the same stretch of boardwalk in daylight. There was no phone. No shattered glass, no piece of plastic, nothing. Just the crust, unbroken except for a single shoe-shaped depression that didn't match the tread of my boots. I didn't tell Carleen. I didn't tell anyone. I just opened the field notebook and stared at the rules until my hands stopped shaking. Eli Barden thought the night rules were hilarious. Over breakfast, 2 days into my rotation, he leaned back in his chair with a mug of coffee and a grin that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "So did the ghost radio call you by name yet? Or are you still waiting for your initiation?" I kept my face neutral. "Haven't had any issues." "That's because there are no issues," Eli said too loud, playing to an audience of Raina and a visiting ranger from the Lake District. Carline's ghost checklist is just her way of keeping rookies on their toes. The fog thing? Temperature inversion. The radio voices? Skip propagation bouncing signals off the ionosphere. The headlamps off trail? Poachers or tourists who can't read a map. Raina didn't look up from her oatmeal. The lake ranger smiled politely and excused herself. Eli caught my eye and shrugged. "Look, I get it. Your first season, everything feels weird. But it's just a park. Geothermal activity, wildlife, basic physics. That's it. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. But I'd heard my father's voice on that radio. Exact and impossible. And I'd seen a phone vanish from ground I couldn't walk on. Physics didn't cover that, sure, I said. Just a park." That night, Eli volunteered to accompany me on patrol and for company, he said, though I suspected it was more to prove a point. We started the route together just after midnight, walking side by side on the boardwalk, with our headlamps cutting pale tunnels through the dark. The air was colder than before, sharp enough to sting the inside of my nose, and the steam rose thicker, moving in slow, deliberate waves across the flats. At 12:40 a.m. near Fountain Paint Pot, we saw the headlamps. They appeared in a barren runoff area about 50 yards off the boardwalk, places where the ground was too unstable and acidic for any trail, too dangerous for anyone to legally enter. 4 lights, maybe 5, moving in a tight cluster, except they didn't move like people walking. They pulsed in unison, brightening and dimming together, then spreading apart in a slow, synchronized pattern, like eyes adjusting to the dark. I stopped walking. "Eli, Rule 4. He squinted toward the lights. "That's just hikers. Lost, probably. If you see headlamps where there is no trail, turn your own off and face away." Eli laughed, short, dismissive. "Noah, come on. Someone might actually be in trouble out there." He turned his headlamp to full brightness and started walking toward the railing. "Hey, you guys okay? You're off trail." The lights didn't respond. They pulsed again, all together, and then spread wider, moving in ways that had nothing to do with human stride or gait. I killed my headlamp and turned away, facing the opposite direction, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Eli, stop, stop." He kept walking. I heard his boots on the boardwalk, then the softer crunch of footsteps on unstable ground as he stepped over the railing. "It's fine, Noah, it's just—" His voice cut off mid-sentence. I counted to 10, then 20, facing away, my headlamp off, my hands clenched at my sides. The steam moved across my peripheral vision in slow, deliberate curtains, backlit by something I couldn't identify. My shadow expanded and shrank on the boardwalk in front of me, stretching long and then snapping short, as if something large had moved between me and the stars. At 30 seconds, I heard footsteps behind me. "Slow, deliberate, boots on wood. Eli?" I said, not turning. "Yeah," his voice sounded calm, almost cheerful. "Yeah, I'm here. Did you find them?" A pause. "Find who?" I turned slowly. Eli stood on the boardwalk, maybe 10 feet away, his headlamp off, his denim jacket dark with moisture. His boots were wet, not damp but wet, soaked through, and when I looked closely I saw steam rising faintly from the leather. "The hikers," I said carefully. "The ones you went to check on?" Eli blinked at me, his expression blank, then laughed. "Oh, right. No, He paused, his mouth opening and closing slightly, as if the words were arriving late, his lips out of sync with his thoughts. "No, there was nobody there, just runoff, reflection on the water, probably." "You walked into the runoff?" "I guess." He looked down at his boots, frowning, as if noticing the wetness for the first time. Weird. We walked back to the bunkhouse in silence. Eli didn't look toward the thermal features, didn't meet the edge of the boardwalk with his eyes. When we passed the spot where the headlamps had been, there was nothing. No lights, no figures, just empty dark and the faint hiss of vents releasing pressure. Back at the bunkhouse, Eli pulled off his boots. They were warm to the touch, the leather softened and pliable, as if they'd been soaking in hot water for hours. He stared at them for a long time, then set them by the wood stove without comment. I opened the field notebook and read Rule 4 again. In the margin, someone had written in pencil, "Headlamps off trail. Reflections hunting attention. Don't give them your beam." I closed the book and looked at Eli. He was staring at the wall, his expression distant, his mouth moving slightly. 5 seconds behind the conversation he was no longer having. I couldn't sleep after that patrol. I lay in my bunk, listening to the bunkhouse creak and Eli's breathing. Steady, but somehow wrong, too measured. Like he was performing the act of sleep rather than experiencing it, and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. The headlamps pulsing in unison. Eli stepping off the boardwalk into a place no one should walk. His boots warm and wet, his words arriving late, his eyes refusing to meet the edge of the thermal features. At dawn, I gave up on rest and pulled the field notebook from under my pillow. The rules stared back at me, clinical and strange, but it was the margins that drew my attention. Decades of pencil annotations crowded the edges of the page, different handwriting styles layered over one another like sediment. Each entry a fragment of someone else's survival. Next to Rule 1 in tight, precise script. Fog on clear nights arrives like breath from below. Count to 40. Let the pattern pass you. Below Rule 4 in looping cursive, headlamps off trail, reflections hunting attention. Don't give them your beam. Beside Rule 5 in blocky capitals, barefoot, water only. Their prints evaporate, and at the bottom of the page, underlined twice, if bison go quiet all at once, get down. Don't turn. I flipped through the notebook slowly, careful not to damage the fragile pages. There were dozens of entries, some dated, most not, stretching back years, maybe decades. Incident reports typed on manual typewriters, Polaroids taped to pages with yellowing adhesive, hand-drawn maps marking locations with small red X's. One memo, dated October 1998, read incident report. Visitor disoriented near Old Faithful Boardwalk. 11:47 p.m. claimed boardwalk dipped like a boat. Reported red eyes in the steam that were not eyes. Physical examination. No injuries, no substances detected. Subject unable to recall prior 40 minutes. Remediation. Replaced missing planks, updated night rules. Recommend continued monitoring. Tucked between 2 pages, I found a Polaroid. The image was grainy, shot at night with a flash that barely penetrated the dark. It showed Geyser Hill, the boardwalk cutting through steam that rose thick and white against the black. But the steam didn't move like vapor. It held a shape, something almost like a face forming and forgetting itself, features assembling and collapsing in the same frozen instant. I stared at it until my eyes ached, trying to convince myself it was pareidolia, the human brain's tendency to find faces in random patterns. But the longer I looked, the more deliberate it seemed, as if the steam had been caught mid-thought, mid-expression, aware of the camera and annoyed by it. At breakfast, Carleen found me at the table with the notebook open. She didn't comment, just poured herself coffee and sat across from me. After a long silence, she said, "Eli told me about last night." "Did he?" "He said he saw hikers off trail and went to check on them." "Said you stayed on the boardwalk and followed the rules?" She took a sip, her eyes steady over the rim of the mug. "He also said his boots got wet, but he doesn't remember how." I closed the notebook carefully. "I told him not to go." "Rule 4, Carline nodded. "I know. And now he's learning why the rules exist." She set down her mug. "The thing you need to understand, Noah, is that this place doesn't haunt like people expect. It's not ghosts. It's not spirits of the dead. It's older than that. The basin records things, behavior, light, names. It learns patterns and repeats them until they feel natural. And at night, when the temperature drops and the thermal activity peaks, those patterns become active. That doesn't make sense." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't, but it's consistent. And consistency is what keeps us alive. I looked down at the notebook, at the decades of pencil marks and careful observations. How long has this been happening? As long as people have been working here, probably longer. We just learned to write it down. She stood, collecting her mug. The rules aren't magic, Noah. They're just trail markers, places where the pattern bends. If you stay on the wood, if you don't answer the wrong voices, if you let the fog pass instead of walking into it, the basin lets you work. Break the pattern and... She gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the meadow and the steam and the lodgepoles. It asks for your attention in ways you won't enjoy. After she left, I turned to a blank page in the back of the notebook and wrote my first entry. October 12th. Radio used exact voice, cadence of deceased family member at 12:17 a.m. Did not respond with name. Used district call sign. Transmission ceased immediately. Phone observed off boardwalk near Pullout 7. Attempted retrieval resulted in crust collapse. Phone vanished when I returned to boardwalk. No physical evidence in daylight. Rule 3 validated. My handwriting looked small and shaky, next to the confident annotations of previous rangers. But it was there, part of the record now, part of the pattern. Ranger Walt Stone arrived at the bunkhouse 3 days later, driving a park service truck with a cracked windshield and a back seat full of gear that looked older than I was. I'd heard his name in passing. 50 winters in Yellowstone. More backcountry experience than anyone still working the park. A legend in the quiet way that some people become legends by simply refusing to quit or die. He was tall and grey, with a face carved by wind and a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale and raised, the kind of mark that comes from something serious. He moved deliberately, economically, wasting no motion, and when he shook my hand, his grip was calloused and steady. Noah Estrada, he said, not a question. Carline mentioned you. Good things, I hope, a faint smile. She said you follow the rules. That's the only good thing that matters out here. We sat on the bunkhouse steps with instant coffee and watched the meadow breathe. Steam rose in slow columns, catching the afternoon light and turning it gold. A raven called from the lodgepoles, harsh and deliberate, and Walt tilted his head slightly, listening, before nodding to himself. Carline showed you the night rules, he said. She did. And you've tested them. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes. He sipped his coffee, silent for a long moment. Then, the basin records behavior. Light and names, most of all. We keep our habits small at night. I thought of the radio using my father's voice, the headlamps pulsing in synchronized patterns, Eli's boots warm and wet with water that shouldn't have been water. It feels like more than recording. It is, Walt said, but that's the part we can understand. So that's what we call it. The rest, he gestured toward the thermal features, the vents releasing pressure in soft rhythmic hisses. The rest we just try not to provoke. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small spiral-bound notebook, his own field log, I realized, edges worn soft from years of handling. He flipped to a page near the middle and showed me 2 entries, both in his precise, economical handwriting. If the wind drops to 0 in a cut, kneel and touch wood. Don't move until the smallest breeze returns. The crust listens for footsteps. If the pay kiosk prints a blank receipt after midnight, don't hand it to anyone. Tear it and pocket the pieces until morning. Those aren't in the official notebook. I said, no, they're supplemental. Things I've learned that haven't made it into the main record yet. He closed his log and tucked it away. The rules evolve. We add to them when we see new patterns, when someone survives something they shouldn't have. But the core stays the same. Don't give the basin your attention at night. Don't let it learn your name, your voice, your light. Stay small. Stay quiet. Stay on the wood. I swallowed the last of my coffee, which had gone lukewarm. Why are you telling me this? Walt looked at me for a long time, his eyes the color of old stone, reflecting nothing. Because you're going to need it. I broke Rule 4 and came back wrong. That means the basin's attention is up. It's active. And when it's active, the patterns get aggressive. Aggressive how? You'll see. He stood, brushing dust from his jeans. One more thing. If you hear calves bawl where there are none, face the lodgepoles and hum. Don't go toward it. Don't try to help. It's not a calf. He walked to his truck without elaborating, leaving me on the steps with cold coffee and a growing certainty that I'd signed up for something far stranger and darker than a seasonal ranger position. That night, I added Walt's rules to my personal notes. The wind dropped to 0 twice during my patrol, and both times I knelt and touched the boardwalk planks, feeling the grain of the wood under my palms, and waited. The first time the breeze returned after 15 seconds. The second time it took almost 2 minutes, and in that silence I heard footsteps on crust that wasn't there, moving in a slow circle around me just beyond the edge of visibility. When the wind returned, the footsteps stopped. I did not turn to look. I did not shine my light toward the sound. I stayed small, stayed quiet, stayed on the wood, just like Walt said, and the basin let me pass. The night it asked me to choose came during the first real cold snap of the season, when frost formed on the boardwalk railings and the stars looked close enough to touch. My patrol started uneventfully. Empty pullouts, quiet thermal features, the usual hiss and gurgle of the basin releasing pressure in the dark. I was halfway through my route, approaching Morning Glory Pool, when I saw her. A teenage girl, maybe 16, stumbling along the boardwalk in bare feet. No jacket, just a thin t-shirt and jeans, her arms wrapped around herself, shivering hard enough that I could see it from 20 yards away. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, staring up at the stars like she'd never seen them before. I stopped walking. Rule 5. Offer water to anyone barefoot but give no directions. Notify dispatch when they leave. She spotted me and staggered forward, her footprints leaving faint, steaming marks on the frost-covered planks that evaporated within seconds, as if she were too warm, as if her skin temperature was all wrong. "Hey," she called, her voice thin and desperate. "Hey, please, which way is the parking lot? I can't find my mom. We got separated and I don't know which way." I unslung my pack and pulled out my water bottle. "Here, drink this." She took it with trembling hands and drank like someone who'd forgotten how, water spilling down her chin, her throat working in strange, delayed swallows. When she lowered the bottle, her eyes focused on mine, and I saw confusion there and fear and something else, something blank, like the inside of a mask. "Which way?" she asked again. "Which way is the parking lot?" My brain screamed, "Help her, she's lost, she's freezing, she needs directions." But the rules screamed louder. Decades of annotations and survival and rangers who'd learned the hard way that the basin asks questions you shouldn't answer. "I can't give you directions," I said, forcing my voice calm. "But I can call someone to help. What's your name?" Her mouth moved, 5 seconds behind the words. "Emily, I just need to know which way, please. My mum." At the radio on my hip clicked. A voice, female, calm, authoritative, exactly like Carlene's tone and cadence, said, "Noah, escort her back to the parking lot. She's lost." I looked at my watch, 12:13 a.m. "If you hear your name on the portable radio after 12:13 a.m., do not answer. Confirm only with district call sign." My thumb hovered over the transmit button. The girl stared at me, barefoot and shivering, her footprints evaporating on the frost. The voice on the radio repeated, more insistent, "Noah, help her." I pressed the button and said, voice flat and mechanical, "Madison 1, reporting contact with possible lost visitor at Morning Glory Pool, requesting backup." Static. Then silence. The radio went dead. Not even the faint hiss of an open channel, just nothing. The girl blinked at me, her expression shifting, confusion giving way to something harder, sharper, almost annoyed. "How you won't help me?" "I gave you water," I said, stepping backward on the boardwalk, keeping my eyes on her face, not her feet, not the evaporating prints. "Someone will come for you. Stay on the boardwalk." "Which way?" she demanded, her voice rising, but the words arrived late, her mouth moving, and the sound following like an echo. I turned and walked backward along the boardwalk. My headlamp pointed down at the planks, narrating into the radio in district call sign only, keeping my voice steady and bland. "Madison 1, continuing patrol. Visitor observed at Morning Glory Pool, awaiting dispatch confirmation." The girl watched me go, her eyes following with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then at the first intersection where the boardwalk split toward the bunkhouse, she vanished. Not walked away, not ducked behind steam, vanished. There 1 second and gone the next. And when I looked down, the frost on the planks was dry, untouched, as if no one had been standing there at all. My water bottle sat on the railing. Empty. I picked it up with shaking hands and continued my patrol. At 1:15 a.m., a call came through on the main dispatch channel. A mother at the north parking lot reporting. Her teenage daughter had just returned to the car, from the opposite direction, saying she'd been walking ahead the whole time and didn't know why her mom had gotten worried. The girl was fine. No signs of distress. No missing shoes. I sat on a bench near the bunkhouse as my shift ended and watched the sky lighten. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I opened the field notebook to a blank margin and wrote in cramped, uneven letters. Water returned somewhere else. I didn't know if I'd done the right thing. But I knew I'd followed the rules, and the girl, whatever she'd been, whoever she'd become in the space between lost and found, had gone back to her mother. The basin had let me pass. This time. The cold front arrived on a Wednesday, slamming into the basin with the force of something angry. Temperatures dropped 20 degrees in an hour, and the thermal features responded like living things provoked, venting superheated steam in thick, roiling columns that moved across the flats like walls. The forecast called for clear skies, but the steam made its own weather, turning visibility to 10 feet in some places, 0 in others. Carline tried to cancel night patrols. Dispatch overruled her, some bureaucratic nonsense about maintaining presence during high-activity periods. So at 11:30 p.m., Eli and I geared up and stepped out into a world that had stopped pretending to be normal. The bison were silent. Not quiet, silent. No snorting, no movement, nothing. The meadow felt emptied, as if every living thing with sense had fled, leaving only us and the steam and the terrible, watchful presence of the basin itself. The wind died at 11:47 p.m. Not a breeze, not a whisper. Absolute zero. The air so still it felt solid, oppressive, like the atmosphere had stopped circulating and was waiting for something. I knelt immediately, touching the boardwalk with both palms. "Eli, get down." "What? Why, get down now." He dropped to his knees, more from the urgency in my voice than understanding. Third, we stayed there, crouched on the boardwalk in the dead air, as the steam piled against the railings in slow, deliberate waves that didn't cross the wood. I counted seconds, 10, 20, 30. At 45 seconds, off-trail headlamps bloomed in the runoff area. 6, 8, maybe a dozen, pulsing in perfect synchronization, spreading apart and contracting like a breathing organism, like eyes opening and closing, like something taking inventory. My radio clicked, my father's voice soft and familiar. "Noah, buddy, you okay out there?" "Talk to me," Eli's radio clicked next. A woman's voice choked with tears. "Eli, please, I need help." "I'm lost. I can't find the car." "Eli, please." Eli's hand moved toward the transmit button. I grabbed his wrist hard. District call sign only. But no. I keyed my radio, forcing my voice flat and procedural. Madison 1, reporting visual anomalies and thermal proximity. Holding position. The radios went silent. The headlamps pulsed brighter, agitated, spreading wider, moving in patterns that hurt to watch, geometries that didn't translate to human motion. Eli's headlamp was still on, pointed toward the lights. "Eli, turn it off." "They're just turn it off and face me." He hesitated, then complied, and in the darkness, his face looked pale and slack, his eyes reflecting something that wasn't my light. The steam thickened, forming a wall 10 feet away, and I could see shapes moving inside it, not defined, not solid, but present, aware, waiting for us to make a mistake. A sound rose from the meadow, thin and high and wrong, calves bawling, distressed and desperate, the kind of sound that triggers every protective instinct. Eli turned toward it. "There's a calf in trouble." "No, there isn't." I grabbed his shoulder and turned him back toward me. "Face the lodgepoles, do it." He stared at me, confused and frightened, but he turned toward the trees and started humming, off-key, shaky, barely audible. I joined him, a low, steady note, and the bawling sound faltered, confused, then faded into the hiss of the vents. The smallest breeze returned, just a whisper against my cheek, and I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Okay, stand up slowly." We rose together. The steam wall remained 10 feet away, breathing in slow, deliberate cycles. The off-trail headlamps pulsed, brighter now, demanding attention. My radio clicked again, my father's voice sharper, almost angry. "Noah, why won't you answer me?" "I need you to—" I reached down and turned the volume to its lowest setting, just above mute, and kept humming. The voice cut off mid-sentence. A shadow moved in the steam. Something large, low to the ground, too big to be a coyote, too deliberate to be a trick of light. It moved parallel to the boardwalk, pacing us, and I realized with cold, absolute certainty that it was a bison, except bison don't move silently. Don't stop breathing. Don't hold perfect stillness and then glide forward like smoke. Don't look at it, I said to Eli, my voice barely a whisper. Eyes on the boardwalk. We're walking back. Lights pointed down. Count to 40 with me. Noah, count. We walked backward, step by careful step, counting together in low, steady voices. The steam wall moved with us, staying exactly 10 feet away, and the shadow bison paced along the edge, never crossing onto the wood, never making a sound. The off-trail headlamps followed, pulsing faster, agitated, and I heard footsteps on crust that wasn't there. Circling, multiplying, closing in. At 30, Eli's headlamp flicked on, pointed toward the lights. I just need to see. I snapped my own lamp on but aimed it down, at the boardwalk planks between us, creating the only light, the only motion for him to follow. Walk to my light, Eli, walk to my light. He hesitated, his beam wavering toward the off-trail headlamps, toward the things that weren't hikers, that had never been hikers. Then slowly he turned and walked toward me, his steps unsteady, his eyes unfocused. At 40, the smallest breeze became a wind. The steam wall sighed, a sound like exhalation, like disappointment, and slid past us, moving on across the flats. The off-trail headlamps retracted, collapsing inward like eyes closing, and blinked out. The radio faded to static. The shadow bison turned and melted into the dark, leaving no prints, no evidence it had ever been. Eli collapsed onto the boardwalk, his knees hitting the wood hard, and I realized he was crying, deep shaking sobs, the kind that come from places words can't reach. His boots were warm again, steam rising faintly from the leather. From the meadow, distant and mournful, the sound of calves bawling lifted one more time, thin and wrong, then stopped abruptly, as if embarrassed to be caught. We sat there until dawn, watching the light return, watching the basin transform back into something that looked almost normal. Almost. The sun rose pale and cold, coughing sulphur-yellow light across the flats. Birds resumed their morning arguments, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. The bison reappeared in the meadow, grazing as if nothing had happened, as if the night had been perfectly ordinary. Caroline found us on the boardwalk at 6:15 a.m. She didn't ask questions, just looked at our faces. Eli's tear-streaked and distant, mine probably not much better, and nodded once. Come on, coffee. We sat at the bunkhouse table, while Carleen brewed a pot of the cheap instant stuff that tasted like dirt and regret. Walt Stone was already there, leaning against the counter, and when I walked in, he met my eyes and gave a small, approving nod that somehow meant more than words. Tell me what happened, Carleen said, setting mugs in front of us. Everything, I did. The wind dropping to zero, the off-trail headlamps pulsing in synchronized patterns. The radio voices, my father, Eli's friend or sister, I didn't ask. Demanding responses by name. The steam wall that breathed and followed. The shadow bison that moved like smoke. The sound of calves bawling where there were none. Caroline listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around her mug, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she turned to Eli. Your boots are warm. He nodded, staring into his coffee. Yeah, second time. Yeah. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, you followed the rules this time. Noah made me, Eli said, his voice barely a whisper. I wanted to answer the radio. I wanted to go toward the lights. I wanted to help the calf. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and lost. It wasn't a calf, was it? No, Walt said quietly. So it wasn't. Caroline pulled the field notebook toward her and opened it to a blank page in the back. She handed me a pencil. Write it down, everything. What worked, what almost didn't, add to the margins. My hand shook as I wrote, if bison fall silent together, get low. Do not turn until wind returns. If radio uses family voices, lower volume and hum. Confirm district only. If fog forms a wall, backwalk boardwalk with light down on planks. Never light the fog. If visitors' prints evaporate, assume they will return elsewhere. Do not pursue. If calves bawl where there are none, face lodgepoles and hum. Do not approach. Caroline read each line carefully, then added one of her own in precise economical script. Never be the first light off boardwalk. The basin enjoys a leader, She initialed each entry CM. Then she slid the notebook to Eli and handed him the pencil. He stared at it for a long time before signing his initials next to each rule. E.B. Walt added his as well, W.S. Then Caroline turned to me. "You did good, Noah. Both of you came back." "That's not nothing. It didn't feel like victory," I said. "It never does." She closed the notebook and set it between us. "But you learned. You adapted. You kept Eli on the wood when the basin wanted him off it. That's the whole job, really. Learning where not to stand and teaching the next person." We drank our coffee in silence. Outside, the meadow steamed peacefully. The lodge poles creaked in a wind that felt almost normal, and a raven called from somewhere close by. Harsh and familiar, at 7:45 a.m., the pay kiosk in the empty pull-out near the bunkhouse whirred to life and printed a receipt. Through the window, I watched it curl from the machine. Blank and white and wrong. I walked outside, pulled the receipt from the slot, tore it into small pieces, and pocketed them without looking at what wasn't printed there. My hands didn't shake as much this time. Maya Tran arrived on a Monday in early October, driving a rusted-out Honda with California plates, and a smile that suggested she'd read the job description and believed it. She was 22, bright-eyed, a recent forestry graduate with a minor in wildlife biology, and the kind of confidence that comes from competence, from believing that preparation and knowledge can solve any problem. Caroline introduced us over lunch, and Maya shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who'd been taught that first impressions matter. "Noah, right?" Caroline said. "You've been here since September. Any advice for a rookie?" I glanced at Carleen, who sipped her coffee without expression. Eli, sitting across the table, stared at his sandwich and said nothing. "Follow the rules," I said. "Especially at night." Maya laughed, a light, genuine sound that felt out of place in the bunkhouse. "Oh, I saw those in the orientation packet. The night rules. Pretty creative way to keep people alert." "I like it." "They're not creative," Eli said quietly, still not looking up. "They're real." Maya's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered. "Right, well, I'm sure I'll figure it out. I don't spook easily." That evening, after dinner, Carleen handed Maya the field notebook. "This is yours while you're on night rotation. Read it, memorize it, follow it exactly." Maya opened it, scanned the typed rules, then flipped through the margins, her expression shifting from amusement to curiosity to something more careful. "These are extensive. They're necessary," Caroline said, "but why? I mean, I understand safety protocols, but these feel—" She trailed off, searching for the right word. "Weird," I offered. "Yeah, weird, specific in strange ways. Like can count to 40 and don't use first names on the radio. What's the reasoning?" "The reasoning," Walt said from the doorway, where he'd been standing silent and unnoticed, "is that 37 people have worked night patrols in this district over the last 40 years, and 37 people have gone home at the end of their seasons. Follow the rules, you make it 38. Maya looked at him, then back at the notebook, then at me. "You really believe this?" "Yes," I said, "all of you." Eli finally looked up, and whatever Maya saw in his face made her smile disappear completely. "Yeah," he said. "All of us." That night, Maya's first patrol, I volunteered to go with her. Caroline approved with a small nod that might have been gratitude or relief. We started the route just after midnight, the stars spilling impossible and cold across the sky, the boardwalk creaking under our boots. At 12:14 a.m., the radio clicked. A voice, male, warm, concerned, with an accent that sounded vaguely like Maya's father or brother or uncle, said, "Maya, are you out there? Maya, can you hear me?" Her hand moved toward the transmit button, fast and instinctive, and I grabbed her wrist. "To district call sign only, but district call sign only." She stared at me, confused and a little angry, but keyed the radio and said, voice uncertain, "Madison 2 on patrol." The radio went silent. A breeze pushed across the meadow, carrying steam in slow, deliberate curtains. Maya looked at me, her face pale in the red glow of our filtered headlamps. "How did you know?" "Rule 2. But it sounded exactly like, "I know." We walked in silence for a while, the boardwalk stretching ahead of us through darkness and steam. At a cut near Fountain Paint Pot, the wind dropped to 0. I knelt immediately, touching the wood. "Get down." Maya dropped beside me without hesitation this time, and we stayed there, crouched together on the boardwalk. As the air went dead and something moved in the steam just beyond the railing, something large and silent and patient, we counted to 40 together, our voices low and steady. At 38, the smallest breeze returned, tentative testing. At 40, the wind resumed, and whatever had been waiting in the steam moved on. Maya was shaking when we stood. "What was that?" "I don't know," I said honestly, "but it's why we kneel." We finished the patrol together, checking each pull-out, logging each anomaly, staying small and quiet, and on the wood. As dawn approached and the sky lightened to grey, Maya turned to me and said, "I'm sorry I didn't believe you. You hadn't seen it yet. Now you have." She nodded slowly, staring out at the meadow where bison were beginning to materialize from the dark, massive and ordinary and real. "Is it always like this?" "No, sometimes it's worse." She laughed, a small shaky sound. "Great, looking forward to it." Back at the bunkhouse, Carline poured coffee and waited. Maya set the field notebook on the table, opened to the margins and picked up the pencil. In careful, neat handwriting, she added beneath my entries, "Radio voice sounded like family. Did not respond with name. Used call sign. Transmission stopped immediately. Rule 2 validated." Empty Carline read it, nodded once and closed the notebook. "Good. You'll do fine." In the distance, a tourist laughed, probably at the absurdity of rules for fog and headlamps and barefoot strangers. The sound carried across the meadow, bright and dismissive and utterly normal. A blank receipt printed in the kiosk near the parking lot, then went still. No one went to retrieve it. The park looked ordinary and enormous in the daylight. The thermal features hissed and gurgled. Tourists gathered at the railings with cameras, and the ranger station buzzed with the mundane logistics of managing a natural wonder. That, I'd learned, was its oldest trick. The basin looked like a place that followed rules, geological, biological, comprehensible. But at night, when the cold dropped and the steam rose and the patterns became active, it revealed itself as something else entirely, a place that remembered, that recorded, that tested the boundaries of what could be survived. The rules kept us alive. The caldera kept its patterns. Between those two hungers, the boardwalk held for the season, for a night, for a count of 40, until someone answered to their name, stepped toward a friendly light, or decided the wood was optional. I'd been here 8 weeks. I had 4 more to go. I opened the field notebook one more time and read through the margins, decades of survival written in pencil, and I thought about all the rangers who'd come before, who'd learned and adapted and lived and left, and all the ones who'd come after, who'd read these pages and follow these rules and add their own annotations to the record. The basin was patient. It had time. It had patterns, but so did we, and that for now was enough.